Hi, welcome to another episode of Startup Strides. Today, my guest is Sie Yin. She's an investor at Systemiq Capital. Welcome, Sie Yin.
Hi, thanks, Javid. Great to be here. Yeah, I'm very
I,
excited for this episode.
I'm even more excited. Physical AI, intelligence, just robotics is extremely trendy, is extremely important, and it seems like the future of technology is moving back in the more hardware, you know, physical direction. And I know that's one of your focus areas. So I'm very much excited to uncover, to learn from you. Quite selfishly, I'm very curious myself, but I'm sure viewers will be as interested as I am too. But before we, I guess, dive into the questions, per tradition, I got to ask a question about your background because everybody's background is interesting and fascinating. Um, I guess let's start with your background. How did you find your way into venture capital?
Yeah. Hi. A bit of background then. I'm actually originally from Malaysia and I came to the UK to study for uni. So I did accounting and finance in LSE. And so my background isn't like a technical background as sometimes a lot of the VCs investors might have. And so it's more of a finance background. I started my career in, doing M&A and financial due diligence, and then kind of realized that I didn't really like working with big corporates and I prefer working with like startups. And so I then went to another team, working with founders and startups to help them build their startups and fundraise from the VCs. And then I found myself, gravitating towards investing. And that's how I joined Systemiq Capital. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I guess before I ask a question about Systemic, which I'm very interested about your thesis, what you guys invest in. Um, One thing I want to really quickly ask is that you have obviously finance background. You worked in finance. It seemed like working in fintech investing space could have been a very natural move for you, perhaps. Why, physical AI? Why robotics?
I think, there's a lot of answers to that. But I think first of all, it came down to personal interest as well. I can't really wake up one day and be like, fintech really, really excites me.
Hmm.
And like it's really what's like making me like can't wait to go to work. That's one thing. So, not to say that there's a lot going on in fintech as well. Lots of like AI cool stuff going on in that world. And so, uh, yeah. So one thing is that just kind of like personal interest, going more into like the general AI world and kind of following myself into like robotics and physical AI as and when that's the hype it's kind of going right now. So yeah.
Fair enough. Systemic capital. What do you guys invest in? And what makes Systemic so interesting and unique?
Yeah, so we're a early stage fund based in London, but we invest across the Europe and the US. We typically invest in Series A stage companies, where tech meets the physical world, and that could be across energy, electrification. With the whole AI boom, obviously that covers like advanced compute as well. So we invest into like photonics, optical interconnects. And we also kind of look at decoding nature stuff. So Basecamp Research, for example, is also one of our portfolio companies. We also invest into robotics, industrial AI, physical AI, or like even people call them embodied AI now. It's just a lot of different terms. But all in all, I would say it's kind of where tech/AI meets the physical world. Yeah.
I didn't know Basecamp Research is in your portfolio. It's such an
Yes.
interesting, exciting
Yeah. Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Um, it's a very interesting space you guys invest in. One, it's just genuinely. I mean, if there's anywhere to be in personally, I think that's the deep tech biotech space. And Series A is a very interesting spot too, right? Like it's a spot where founders more or less finding product market fit and they're focused on scaling. Um, I guess I'm curious, as from your own experience, what I've talked to VCs in pre-seed seed stage, and it's becomes much more about the founder. I'm sure Series A is still very much about the founder, but there's also financials and numbers and the product involved. One, what makes investing in Series A so interesting, and two, how do you compete in Series A? I feel like it becomes quite more competitive once it reaches Series A. Everybody's interested in how we can get into the deal. So yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So yes, very true on those two things. First, like I think why Series A is so interesting is because you Series A is that inflection point on like at where literally this product becomes like super scalable and when it becomes like the thing, right? At pre-seed seed, a lot of times it depends solely on the founder, and on like I guess Series B, Series C onwards, a lot of the times it depends on like the financials itself and the unit economics. And so I feel like Series A is that nice little bridge in between the two where you kind of need to have both, but you also don't need to, really pin down on one side of the things of the two. So like at Series A, it is very interesting because like ultimately it is still up to the founder, but at that point you can already you already have like 1 or 2 years, maybe 1 year of like experience and time of like history to look at like what they've done, whether when they face problems, like have they actually shied away or have they actually tried to solve it. That's kind of the one thing. At pre-seed seed, a lot of it is based on what they've done before this startup, whereas Series A you can actually see what they've done in this lifetime. And then there's obviously some bit of financials to look at as well, not just like literally selling you the dream, like a pre-seed founder. So that's what I find interesting about. And the getting into the round is interesting because that is a real problem to have at Series A stage. But yeah, I think the way our fund functions is that everyone kind of have their own specialty area as well. So for example, like, our managing general partner really focuses into like energy electrification. And so I think the way this works is that when you're really specialized and focused in one certain area, people your network is kind of around the area. People know you for this thing. So deals would come to you rather than the other way around, and people think of you when they talk about like the energy expert, that for example. So that's kind of how we try to get into some of these very interesting deals.
And God, the more you speak, the more questions I have. Some people have PhDs, obviously, in let's say quantum, quantum computing, quantum physics. Obviously, they will know their stuff. They'll understand the research. For somebody, I guess, who comes from a non-technical background, one, how do you approach kind of that investing? How do you approach evaluating these complex technologies? And two, how do you develop that expertise?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I do get that question actually, but I think, honestly, I think it's more of an advantage at some points rather than a hindrance actually, because um technical depth is great. You need to have the technicalities to kind of assess the setups, like you say. But again, I think then with if you're just a very very technical person, you tend to focus on what can be done rather than what should be done. And I think from a non-technical person point of view, you can then kind of stand out of that and be like, actually, would the customers buy this? Like, how can I actually scale this? How can I commercialize this? And this is something that I feel like a lot of the technical founders are like people sometimes miss, because a lot of great founders out there building all these great products, but sometimes that's not exactly what the market wants, and that's not exactly what they can sell either, or maybe because no one just wants to buy it, even though it's like a 10/10 product. Um, and so I think that's where I kind of bring that advantage into it, looking at like whether that's a product market fit, how do we integrate this into like the existing workflows, who actually buys it, what's the unit economics behind, how to commercialize it, that sort of things. But then obviously then how do I get the kind of experience and technicality to kind of assess all of these, is that we or I like speak to, as a fan as well, we speak to a lot of people that are actually in the field. So for example, in robotics then and like manufacturing industry, for example, we speak to a lot of the operators, people that are actually working in the factory floor. understanding like what's actually broken in that space, what they have tried and hasn't worked. Um, and so really understanding the real world rather than because sometimes when you speak to founders all the time, you get to a sense where you get to your own bubble as well. And so you sometimes need to go back to the drawing board and be like, okay, what's actually broken here though? So that's kind of that. And obviously we rely on a lot on external technical due diligence as well.
Very quickly, I guess I'm curious, personally, in terms of increasing your own understanding, do you go back to articles, to books? Do you use LLMs to explain you stuff?
AI.
Is it
Yeah.
a mix of things, right?
Yeah, AI. Literally use AI for your knowledge. It's so good in understanding an industry really quickly. Yeah.
As a follow up to that, God, we're still stuck on the first question because it's so interesting. But I guess as a follow up to that, going back to my point, how getting into Series A can be quite hard, especially if you have A16Z, Kleiner Perkins, index ventures showing up. The founders, obviously everybody wants a brand name, brand VCs. It's good to be backed by those VCs, um, and becomes very competitive. So as a junior VC, if you're a general partner, you have your network, people know you. That's a different thing. As a junior VC, as you are, kind of going up in this field, in this space, how do you stand out? How do you build your edge? I see people doing hackathons. I see people building communities. I see people, going to these conferences, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, there's not a single formula, but I'm curious, what do you think is the right way, and what do you do personally?
I think, like you said, the right way is to find your edge, and then build onto that. Um, like, and honestly, junior VCs, they also have their own kind of advantage to it that I think GPs don't have, because it's always harder for another GP of a fund to tell another GP of the fund what they're actually looking at and what's actually interesting. Whereas it's sometimes easier for junior VCs to kind of exchange information in a more kind of truthful way and, like a more kind of exchanging deal flow base of ways. And so that's kind of like the thing that I see as well in the junior VC world. You're actually like friends. And I think actually that does come back. That actually brings my point to relationships is the whole thing in VC world. And you probably get that a lot as well, hear that a lot as well. And so using that edge to build the relationships that really matter and like build real relationships rather than just kind of surface relationships are what is going to help you to like get into like deals that are like really interesting or like even not even getting into deals like just looking at what's really interesting. um and yeah, that's what I do, like going to events, speaking to people. My edge could be like Asians, that could be an edge as well, so that sort of things. Yeah.
Mm, that's really interesting. Well, I am personally curious about this because it can be quite transactional sometimes, right? Founders want something, investors want another thing. How do you manage to foster genuine relationships in such dynamics?
I think you always it's the same as how you build friendships, I think, really. When you speak to someone, or I guess let's start building a relationship, like um don't expect something back. I think it's always kind of like what can you offer in this relationship, like what can I actually do for them that will help them, rather than kind of like what can I get out of this relationship. And when you go into every relationship with this mindset, I feel like it just kind of compounds, because I guess when you just do things for people, it then kind of comes back to you in some way or another, even though you're like but you have to like be not expecting it at all. So that's kind of that. And sometimes it's literally just, speaking to a founder to learn more about what they're building rather than like actually investing in it. And so it can be a very, yeah, it doesn't have to be super transactional as always.
Friend first before an investor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough. Uh, okay, now we can move on to the the gist of things, which is the area you invest in. It's robotics, embodied AI, physical AI, and it's that space has gone through multiple hype cycles, and I feel like a real world application kind of lagged behind expectations too. From your perspective, what's genuinely different now?
Mm. Um, yeah, no, you're right. It's gone through so much hype, right? And you probably saw a lot of the kind of new humanoids robots unloading, loading dishwasher, doing all of these cool things at home. Um, and I think like it's only really changed in the past maybe like 6 to 9 months ish. I think what's really changed is first of all, there's been a change in the foundational models. VLA models, which stands for Vision Language Action Models, have really changed things because now the robots can actually adapt in real time rather than just being pre-programmed. A lot of the old robotics, the ones that you've seen like in factories like 20, 10 years ago, they were all pre-programmed in a way where when you see this, you do this. When you see it, and whereas now VLA model is more like ChatGPT, for example, in that sense. And so that's really changed in the kind of this last 1 year. And I guess secondly, hardware has just gone a lot cheaper. Um, Now I think you can buy a robot for like 15K from China. Like so it's gotten really cheap, and it's not just that as well. It's a lot of things like sensors, compute, all of these things that make the robot have also gone really cheap. Um that's because the whole hardware supply chain has just really matured, and the whole Chinese robotics ecosystem have really blossomed as well. And so the price has really gone down. And then I think also there's a real kind of change in like demographics at the moment. There's this like aging demographic in factory floor workers. And then the young workers, young generation like us don't want to work in factories. There's literally no one to work in factories. Like I actually spoke to this founder before, and he was telling me how he builds robots, and he basically sold to a factory that um at that point the factory was complaining no one wanted to work in the factory, and the CEO had to come down and work himself, which I found really interesting because like we're in a world where yeah, basically there's not going to be many humans that want to kind of do this sort of labor work anymore, and that there's obviously also kind of like manufacturing reshoring trend going on where everyone is, because of all of these supply chain issues, wars, and everything like that, people are all trying to pull back their supply chain into their own country or like nearer to them. And so everyone then right now is going into this like automation and robotics, trying to automate everything they can in a factory. Um, yeah, I would say those are like the main three things that have changed in the past year or so.
And you're right. A lot of the public focus and narrative has been kind of focused on and shaped by humanoid robots, which sometimes in utopian, sometimes in dystopian ways. Um, but it seems like you're seeing the most compelling near-term value in different applications in different ways, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. Because I think the near-term value I see is in the vertical robots. Um, I think when the founder that's building a robot is really focusing on one problem and one specific task, like embarrassingly deep, that's where the value is. Because it's much better than having a general purpose robot that can do everything. It's one thing is because it's also because of the data compounding effect that you can have as a vertical robot. When you're a vertical robot focusing on just one thing, you're literally um, training this robot on this exact task, exact like exact task and exact environment. Okay, maybe not exact environment, but like this task for like a really long time. And so you get a lot of data from it, and you just like keep getting better and better and better. Whereas general purpose, you just have like so much to go after, and you don't really know um how the real world is like. For example, humanoids, a lot of them are in homes, and homes are extremely unstructured environment. Kids crying, milk spilling, coffee spilling, that sort of thing. You just never really know. There's so many tasks to focus on and so many tasks to train the robots on, and it's really difficult to like you don't know what you don't know basically is kind of the gist of it. And so I do think like the near-term value is in the vertical robots. Yeah.
It is. It does seem like, even with AI startups, initially, in initial wave, you saw a lot of horizontal application, but then as time passes, you see the best startups are actually vertically focused, narrowly focused startups. So I guess same thing, same logic applies there too. But in a bit of a different way, it's easier to train, let's say, LLM models because there's so much information available online, from code bases to, I don't know, just books, anything really, right? Versus training a robot, it's most of the data is very much localized in certain environments. It's um, kind of like isolated. It's proprietary. Fine. What do you think about just finding the right data sets? Training. What's the right way to do it? What's the right way to approach it?
I think the problem that you're talking about here is the seam to real gap. Um, so when I was talking about the VLA models, I think a lot of the kind of smarter or like more frontier observers in the space have realized that the VLA models are no longer really working because it's lacking the physics of it. It's good that that a robot can kind of see, adapt, and act in a loop, but training on internet data is not going to tell you like how much force to put on a gripper, for example, and the robot doesn't know it, and that's the seam to real gap that we're talking about. And so that's why there's been a lot of kind of like rising rising trend of startups in the physics simulation world, in the world models world, where robots are actually trained in this like virtual accurate physics environment. um but this problem that you're talking about is essentially the seam to real gap problem, and it's a real problem that I think a lot of the people in the robotic space are still trying to crack it. It's a very hard problem because like just a very like kind of simple example is that what we see as humans can be very different from what a robot see and what they interpret it, as. Like for example, on a table, when you see a shiny spoon, it's a shiny spoon. But for a robot, it might just be like a reflection of a light of something. Like, and they might just think that there is a hole in it, almost like they don't actually know what is that. Because of the reflection of light, that something. So a lot of things have to go right for them to know that that is a spoon. And and again, this comes back to the we don't know what we don't know problem, because you don't really it goes back to the deployment problem of robotics. You really only know where the robots fail until you deploy them in the real world. So you can only really collect like these all of these like real edge cases when they're deployed in the real environment. You only know, oh, actually they can't see the spoon, or like, they break when the table moves by like 0.05 cm. Um, and all of these things you can really only find out in the real world, and that is also the deployment problem that the robotics world have right now. Yeah.
From the things you've seen, from people you've talked to, and I'm sure there's some environments that have the biggest opportunity for robotics versus some other environments. I guess because of the nature of the work or because of the quality of the data, existing data, etc. Can you give me an example of maybe one or two where like you see that problem being minimal compared to other areas?
Do you mean like a robot like
To seem to you said you mentioned seem to
seem to
um,
real?
real world gap. I'm assuming there's certain environments where it is not as severe, and I guess where the biggest opportunities lie, right?
Okay. I think I think the biggest opportunities is actually in industrial environment, um, because industrial environment is slightly more structured, in that sense compared to like homes, for example. And like we kind of like discussed earlier before, homes is just super unstructured and there's a lot of moving parts. Whereas in industrial environment, it's easier. It's also really difficult. They have their own kind of set of problems, but it's easier in that sense because they're more structured. And so, um, it, and so the robots actually have kind of less edge cases to deal with in that sense. And this is also exactly why I think humanoid is still a very far kind of vision, because humanoid is not going to be the type of robots that can live in these industrial settings. They're not like industrial settings isn't built for humanoids, and so they can't really be there. Um, and so these other kind of like other types of robots, like dual arms or other forms that are slightly more structured, would do better in industrial settings.
It's very interesting. I recently saw one startup that's um, so the LLMs are becoming kind of a thing of the past now. The new way to train AI is through real world experiences. And I think they raised like 1 billion seed or something like that, something insane number like that. Do you think that kind of that would be a huge unlock for humanoid robots or robots in general? Because learning from experience, like a child would learn, might be a huge unlock for robotics soon. No,
No, yeah, 100%. It could be, yeah. But it's still a very, I think as of now, it's still a very long-term game. But I could be wrong. It could change in the next 6 to 12 months. Look at how Claude and all this Anthropic
yeah,
AI ChatGPT game is playing right now.
yeah,
So it could change very quickly.
it could change. So I guess very naturally, my question to you would be, what a ChatGPT moment for robotics looks like?
Yeah. Um, So when I think about what the ChatGPT moment for robotics looks like, I think it's less about the capability of it. It's more about the accessibility of it. Um, and so I think it's a true ChatGPT moment for robotics when a non-technical engineer is able to deploy a fleet of robots in their factory without any downtime integration at a like accessible price point, and is able to kind of run it like 24/7. That's when the true ChatGPT moment for robotics is. And I think we're not exactly there yet, because that literally goes back to what we were talking about, the whole like integration problem and the deployment problem issue. So yeah, I think it's more about the accessibility. When in the future, when someone can just use the robots like a SaaS software, like an AI play right now, that is when it is.
Interesting. So we mostly talked about industrial applications. I remember I was talking to my friend who started this startup to help the elderly, and just kind of monitor the elderly through robotics, through some integration. I'm curious about your perspective on where do you think in consumer space robotics might be, kind of where it can find its set. What's the right word for it?
Like which space?
Which, like, especially in consumer,
Yeah.
use cases, where do you think robotics might actually find its, footing?
So kind of just to caveat a little bit as well, we don't actually invest in any kind of consumer startups. So I guess I haven't really looked at that space as much, but I have seen quite a lot of the consumer robotics, as well, especially the humanoids. Almost all of them are basically for consumers. I actually also met a startup that is kind of serving the elderly care, also like a half humanoid robot, for homes as well. Um, Consumer robotics, I think, is still a bit far fetched at this moment because of all of the things that we just mentioned. Um, yeah, it is still very difficult. But I have seen Sunday Robotics. I don't know if you have heard of. So Sunday Robotics have actually progressed pretty well. They their robots can actually now fold socks pretty well, which is it sounds easy, but it's actually a very hard thing to do if you think about folding socks, because you literally need the robots to like do this, and it's not an easy thing to do when you kind of have to like line it out together and then do it. Um, And so there's been some real progress there, but like you know how our human bodies are like. There's so many dexterity. There's just so many things that we can do that the robots can't do yet. And so I still think it's a very far fetched play. Yeah.
That's very interesting because I had a question like that in my mind, but there's certain things that are so simple to us that robots just can't really do. What is one kind of extremely obvious thing that we wouldn't even think about, but robots like still struggle to this day? Do you have an example besides maybe folding socks? Because I know that hand motions
Oh,
and finger motions are a very huge thing, right?
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So this is actually what they call a Moravec's paradox. Um, a robot can do something that is extremely difficult, like humans find extremely difficult, like scoring 100 on like an Olympic maths competition. Like they can do it really well, but they struggle to do the things that we find really simple. Um, that is the whole like robotics paradox, and I guess what I think they still probably struggle with a bit is um even still loading dishwasher. I think is still pretty tough. I mean, I have seen a lot of robots loading dishwasher, but to do that like correctly, to do that accordingly with the different type of plates and glasses and cups and texture. What if this is bigger? What if this is slightly more slippery? That sort of things, because it all goes back to the physics of it, like the texture of it, and how heavy is this thing? Because when the robot is trained on internet data, they don't know how heavy or like I guess when you just hold this mouse, like you would instantly know that, oh, it's about to slip, and so you would actually like grip it a bit harder. Those sort of things I think are still where robots are finding it difficult. But actually I do think that the people building in this space know this is a problem, and so they are actively kind of working towards it. Yeah.
The more I learn about this kind of things, the more fascinated I become about human body and human brain in general. It's the way we're just organized and designed. It's genuinely so fascinating.
It's true.
You've spoken about the importance of middleware, the orchestration layer and integration layers. Why is this layer is so critical, and would it take for a company to become the operating system of industrial robotics?
Yeah, because I think this again goes back to the whole deployment and integration problem. Um, it like I guess think about Stripe for payments for fintech, right? Um, they're building something that everyone could use. Everyone wanted to build on their own, but didn't, and so they just become like this operating systems layer for payments. And I think um that is where what do I call it? Like people can play in that kind of integration orchestration layer, because nowadays you people founders build really cool robots, but then it takes weeks or even months to integrate these into like factory floors. First of all, because factory floors are really old. They have all of these like legacy systems running around. They have they're just not AI native, and so it's always a really huge problem to try and integrate all of these new robots into there, and you have to retrain your employees, so that sort of thing. So a lot of integration problem. And so when you build in this like orchestration layer, it just helps these robots to integrate into this factories really, really quickly. It is not even just the integration thing. It's also kind of like fleet orchestration, right? When we move forward and forward, when you have more and more robots and different kind of robots, and maybe one that is a mobile robot, like going around picking up things for your another robot to kind of do your things. Like who is controlling all of these robots? The legacy systems don't really know how to do that. Like it's a huge problem as well. And sometimes these problems kind of deter all of these factories um from buying and deploying these robots, because they then is like, what's the point? Like, I don't want to have all of these take on these new problems. to think about. And so these fleet, there are also a lot of players coming up in the space where they build like the fleet orchestration layer, where they can essentially have a platform that let you view all of your robots in your factory. You can choose like which robot does what, like whether this robot is down on battery, it goes back to its charging port, another one is then programmed to kind of come out at that time, or yeah, that sort of things, like how they work together. And so I think the integration layer, the whole like middleware orchestration layer is very key and very important in this whole robotics world as we move forward, because right now there's just a huge like gap between where we actually are in the factories and what is already possible. Yeah.
That is interesting. I actually had a founder on who was building the orchestration layer for AI agents, because there's so many AI agents being deployed in, especially
Okay,
in
very
enterprise
cool.
level, and having that orchestration layer seems like a very common thing that not a lot of people are actively building. From what I've seen, there's still a lot of focus on AI agents and etc.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the orchestration layer is not. But it's cool that you're focused on. Eh, Isambard would that fall under that? I think the recent race Series A, they are operating system for
Yeah.
factories, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's smart. Yeah.
that's really cool.
There's a
Uh,
lot. Yeah. Exactly.
any startups you find interesting personally? Any startups that you're personally excited about?
Um. Well, Isamba is definitely one as well. There's quite a lot of it. We actually have one that is also similar in that space. It's called Archetype AI, ARCHE TYPE AI. They are also kind of in that like AI agent manufacturing layer. So really cool. So I guess yeah, in this AI native world, you kind of have to have that, even if it's in the legacy industry.
It's been such an interesting episode, and we are somehow at the end of our episode. I have one more question to go, which is, it, I'm really interested to hear what's one widely believed idea in robotics or embodied AI that you think is just wrong.
The funny thing is, I feel like I've repeated it so many times that it just feels wrong to repeat it again. But I'll say it and then kind of explain it a little bit more. And I think basically a lot of the thing that I believe is kind of wrong right now is that humanoids are inevitable here in the near term. I still think it's really far because, like, first of all, humanoids right now, as we say, they're in the home kind of settings. They're more useful in the home settings, but that is a whole like harder problem, right? And there are a lot of factories also trying to bring humanoids. Sorry, there are a lot of players also trying to bring humanoids into factories, but I think the factories were never kind of built for humans, and so there's this like mismatch of like putting humanoid form factor into a space where it's not actually built for humans. It's this so and that's why I think like humanoid is still a very kind of far fetched view. I could be wrong. I'm very happy to be proven wrong. it, yeah, we could in 6-12 months time be seeing a robot doing really cool things. I mean, a lot of the Chinese factories have already have like robots in their factories, but those are all like greenfield factories. We're talking about the brownfield factories we have here in the Europe. There's a lot of them. A lot of them still are just the old systems, people typing into Excel using really old laptops that you see. So yeah, we're still really far from it. Yeah.
I think being DC is one of those jobs is that being wrong is as equally exciting as being right.
Yeah, it's
So
true. I
maybe,
sometimes hope that I was wrong, like,
yeah,
not
yeah,
sometimes, most of the times, yeah, so
yeah. I mean, maybe it means less money, but it's still very exciting, right?
yeah, yeah,
um,
it's true.
I know I said a last question, but I lied. I'm going to ask one more question, and that's the last one. Um, for young founders, masters, PhDs who want to build in this space, it's not an easy space to build in, because it's not like software. We can just iterate, ship, iterate, get feedback. It requires investment, sometimes quite a bit of, it can be quite capital intensive. You can just like prototype and change and do something else, how they should approach building the space.
I would say go and learn first from the people that are already really in the space. There's so many like new robotics startups in the space right now. You can easily kind of go into one of these startups and try to see like how they're building it, what they're actually building, and then learn from there. And because in that way you can also speak to potential customers that really understand the problem very well. And you can apply your PhD skills and knowledge into it. Um, yeah, rather than kind of like reinventing the wheel. I mean, if you have a really good solution, then obviously like go ahead. But I think it's always good to kind of spend even a few months in a robotic startup just to learn. Yeah.
See, and it was a very interesting, insightful episode. Thank you so much for your time and insights.
No worries. Thank you for having me, Javid.